This is Joe Deckelmeyer with Screen Rant. We are at Comic Con 2023. I am with Dr. Travis Langley. We're going to be talking about Batman and psychology of superheroes and Doctor Who, Stranger Things. It's pretty fascinating stuff. What inspired you to combine psychology and pop culture?
Oh gosh, that story is longer than it deserves to be. One thing I read a book by Danny Fingeroth, Superman on the Couch, in which he's talking about how we think about superheroes and how it affects people and inspires people. And in the course of that, he made a comment about how in the 50 years after Frederick Wortham, a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, as I as a psychologist point out, Wortham was a psychiatrist, hurt the industry so badly. In the 50 years after that, almost nobody in psychology had written anything and studied anything and Danny made me think, I want to write this kind of book, but as an actual psychologist. And I'd had another book I wanted to read, but when it hit me on Batman, I was like, oh, if I do a book on the psychology of Batman, I set other projects aside. I knew I could get that book out there. I had a 3-year plan that became a 4-year plan because of a delay in the last Batman movie. It gave me time to do things such as get to know the producer of the Batman movies who wrote my forward. Uh,
That's awesome.
Adam West, who had been my childhood Batman. I got to know him, and so I had a lot of wonderful. And after that happened, other psychologists wanted to be involved too. So, SpiderMan Psychology, Untangling Webs, with a forward by Danny Fingeroth, who wrote that first book that inspired me, Once Upon a Time.
That's incredible. That is incredible. Now, talk to me about looking at these particular characters like Batman,
Yes.
Spider-Man, Stranger Things, Doctor Who, in through the lens of psychology.
Mhm. Well, as fans, we ask psychological questions all the time. And you say, why are they doing that? Or it's like, oh, how's that going to affect him? Oh, that's going to mess him up. You're talking about psychology as a lay person. I want to answer some of these
Sure.
questions. So it's like the first one, Batman and psychology, not the psychology of Batman, because it works both ways. We're using psychology to look at the characters, and that tends to be what the readers come for.
Right.
But we're also using these characters and stories to teach some things about real human nature, some things we've learned. And of course, certain topics pop up in almost every single book, like trauma. Uh,
Which is literally my next question.
but I still want to make sure we're saying something different every single time, so that if this is the first book they've read that I've worked on, they still get it, and the person who they've gotten them all. And I've seen people send me photos where they have a stack of all of them. I want to make sure they're still getting something out of it too, because human beings are complicated, and
They
there's
are
plenty to say.
absolutely. Now, all of these characters kind of face deep trauma in their lives. How does this impact some of their actions?
Well, I mean, you can see the inspiration in some of the origin stories, but also along the way, the repeated trauma. There's a more recent term that's grown popular among therapists where they're referring to complex PTSD, whether it's somebody who had a severe abuse, recurring trauma,
Yeah.
trauma over and over, not just one traumatic event. It's not in the DSM that's popular with psychiatrists in America, but the World Health Organization uses it. And the superheroes are affected by what they've gone through over. When Jason Todd dies in the comics, spoiler from around 90.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, when Jason Todd dies in the comics, Batman's behavior changes. He functions worse than he did before. He shows more PTSD symptoms at that point, probably the most in his entire career, than he did before. So it's they have to repeatedly go through it. There's also something called post-traumatic growth. People who've gone through trauma and they use it to motivate them or to find purpose and grow as people. They probably have a couple of PTSD symptoms. They may have had full PTSD, but such as they hang on to it more than other people. John Walsh, whose son Adam was brutally murdered.
Right.
Candace Leitner, whose daughter was killed by a drunk driver, and others. They take their pain and they use it to help others, to help keep others from going through what they went through. And this pops up in so many of these superhero stories and the other fictions that we look at as well. But half my books are on comics because that's what I love.
Absolutely. Now, while working on these books, is there something that you uncovered to it maybe surprised you to help fans understand some of these characters more?
Sometimes, yeah. But, I mean, I'll hear from some people who say, "Oh, these books inspired them to go into psychology or to go to graduate school or focus in a particular area." But I also get messages from people, such as this woman who told me that something I said in the afterword in my Star Wars book was exactly what she needed to hear while she was dealing with her dying father. It's just this comment I made that one of the great lessons from Star Wars may simply be that there's never only one hope.
Right.
And that was what she needed to hear at that moment. Another young man came up to me at a table and was telling me about how Yoda saved his life. He'd been a combat veteran, so he'd gone through many, many things. I won't go into the details, but it was just something Yoda said that helped him, and then that led him to things such as this, which then helped him reframe what he was doing. So there's a big range on how these affect people.
So fascinating. Can we talk about the Spider-Man psychology?
Sure,
Um,
that's the newest one.
absolutely. So talk to me about uncovering some of Spider-Man a little bit and what would surprise fans that's in this book.
Well, of course, we talk a lot about him as the poster boy for the neurotic superhero. That's what comic book writer John Ostrander had called him. I think some others have called him that too. But along the way, while working on this, I decided, calling him the poster boy for the neurotic superhero. Neurotic meaning not handling stress well as you ought to, being driven by stress related things such as guilt more than others. You're really calling him the most human superhero. And that is a big part of why he resonates, why he is so dadgum popular. Often the best-selling superhero in the world. It is his humanity is what makes him popular, what makes him endure. That neurotic quality appeals to us because to one degree or another, we've all got something neurotic in us, which means it's normal to have something neurotic in you to a degree. And it's a lot of work and a lot of fun going in all these. This one, I loved working on it so much that if I never did another one, I said I felt like it would be complete to me.
Really?
Although the next two were already in the works, but I would have felt complete for having worked on the Spider-Man book too.
Can you tease what the next two are?
We've got a second edition of the Doctor Who book coming out later this year. Well, the first edition, it was Doctor Who Psychology: A Madman with a Box. That subtitle no longer applies. The Doctor's been a woman, for those of you who don't know. We have a couple of doctors. We got interviews with several doctors to fit in, and other new discussions. So I had to take out some of the old chapters and fit new ones in and update others. So there's the update to that one. That's not the same as writing a full book. And then for next year, we're working on one about The Handmaid's Tale.
Ooh.
Yeah, I have found that one makes me crankier at times than working on some of these others.
Really?
Yeah, and then those are the two I can. Then I know exactly what I want to work on for the year after next.
Yeah, I want to talk about Doctor Who for a second
Yes.
because with Doctor Who, a new actor and writer take on the new generation every few years. How does that shift impact who Doctor Who is at their core?
Yeah, in fact, at the beginning of the book, I get into the issues of what are the key characteristics. There was a documentary some years back in which Peter Davison, who played the Fifth Doctor once upon a time,
Also, David Tennant's
David, yes, the 10th Doctor's father-in-law and the real father of the actress who plays Tennant Doctor's daughter. Okay. Um, it's
That's
David.
a whole new book.
That's a whole
different
new book.
Yeah.
I really want to do one on sex, love, and Doctor Who. I've been it's not just doing what will sell. It's like what do I want to write about?
Yeah.
What do we have something that we can really talk about real human nature through? And then what will the publisher let us? But with the Doctor Who, Davison was talking to a psychologist for a documentary years ago. But what are these core characteristics?
Yeah.
And every version of the Doctor, he is somebody who is outraged by injustice, outraged by mistreating people. Some of the Doctors are more angry about that than others. Some will be a little more resistant, like the first Doctor, more resistant to changing history at all, but he still butts in repeatedly.
Right.
This is somebody who it tends to be very present focused. He doesn't tend to have long-term plans. He's on the run from and to, just on the run. He wants to do whatever he's doing next. for whatever reasons, and we speculate on those a little. And with each actor, when they bring the second Doctor in, they didn't just come up with someone who kind of looked like William Hartnell. They came in with somebody very different.
Yes.
One of the companions, Ben and Polly are there, and Ben says, "It's like he's not even acting like the same person." And this brings in something creative and fresh. That one little gimmick they did way back when is what has kept Doctor Who going and fresh and alive because it's constantly renewing.
Yeah.
And we're constantly rediscovering it through those new actors and the new companions. Any new Doctor's first episode or any new companion's first episode is generally a great point to jump in because it's repeatedly reintroducing itself to us.
Absolutely. Now, back to Spider-Man real quick. Can you also tell me why you think Spider-Man tends to be one of the most iconic and beloved superheroes of all time?
Well, there's that humanity that is absolutely there. It's in the early 60s when Stan and Jack and Steve were bringing humanity into their superhero characters at a time when the superheroes were pretty flat
Right.
elsewhere. It's they reach like the peak of it with Spider-Man. This younger individual we can relate to more. And that design, he can be anybody behind that mask. We were doing a panel last night with Danny Phantom, John Semper Jr., showrunner of Spider-Man the
Okay.
animated series, and David Hooker from Disney.com. He was saying, if you hear, it's not just the mask; it's Peter Parker's own background.
Mhm.
If you don't know what Peter Parker looks like, and you just hear his background, this kid whose parents are gone, he's living with these older aunt and uncle, and the uncle dies, and he said, if you shut your eyes and you just hear the story itself, you don't immediately picture any particular race. You don't immediately imagine any particular demographic. He feels you tend to imagine whatever your default is on imagining people. And so Peter Parker himself, not just the Spider-Man design, is very generalizable, very relatable.
Now, Dr. Langley, if anybody wanted to know more about Spider-Man and the psychology, where can they get the book?
Oh, that's a great question. Barnes and Noble has been great about carrying these books. Amazon is where a whole lot of people get them. Those tend to be the two biggest where people get them, and of course, and I'm easy to find. Look for Travis Langley online. I'm one of the 10 most followed psychologists on Twitter, whatever that's worth now.
Yeah, that's true. Dr. Langley, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
It's been
thank
so
you.
fast. Wait, I gotta ask too.
Yes.
Who's your favorite doctor? And
Well,
has that changed upon your research?
it changes over time. It kind of depends on whose stories I'm looking at. It's the Fourth Doctor. I always love the Fourth Doctor. Tennant, Smith. Over time, I've become really interested in the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton,
Really?
even though so many of his stories are missing. But he seems to be. He's the model of the heroic doctor that one way or another runs a thread through all the rest of them. And I would love to have seen a lot more of Patrick Troughton.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Langley. This is a good
Oh, thank
conversation
you.
about this. I appreciate it.